So, welcome to our May podcast, Inhale Life Asthma Conversations from the Chicago Asthma Consortium. Again, I'm your host, Sharmili Nienhuis, and I'm an associate professor and clinician in asthma at the University of Chicago. Today, I'm super excited to have an old friend and her sister join us to just talk a little bit about living with asthma. I feel like more often than not, we don't get a chance to hear from the people living with the disease. You get to hear from us academics sometimes and others about, how we manage the disease, but just really wanted to talk about living with the disease. And as many of you may know, that May is Allergy and Asthma Awareness Month. So just wanted to get the word out about those two major diseases. So first I'll have you guys introduce yourself. Sarah, would you like to start?
Sure. I'm Sarah Rittner. Um, I am a longtime champion and colleague and supporter of the Chicago Asthma Consortium. And as Sharmili pointed out, a good friend, past friend, colleague. I live in Chicago for 24 years now, in the Humboldt Park neighborhood. In my professional work, I work in public health and health equity and community engagement.
Great. Rebecca?
I'm Rebecca Rittner. I'm Sarah's younger sister. Had to throw that in. I also reside in Chicago in Humboldt Park. Sarah and I actually share a apartment together. I am not affiliated with the healthcare or health at all. I actually work in advertising. I'm a regional account director for a major, I should say, luxury automotive brand. So I work in the multicultural space specifically. So yeah, excited to be here.
Okay. Again, thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your day to do this. So again, we're having you guys both here because you both have asthma. So just kind of wanted to first start with when you both were diagnosed with asthma, how did your asthma diagnosis come about?
Yeah, so I can actually start. I was pretty ill as a child, constantly in the hospital, had a lot of food allergies and other things. You know, that's where I first got my diagnosis. So I honestly don't even remember. I've lived with it since infancy. I had it so severely at one point that, they were testing me for things like cystic fibrosis, just because I was, constantly in the hospital and having issues. So I know no life without asthma. I've had it forever, and thankfully have been able to now manage it pretty well. But I think we'll probably get into that a little bit later on. But that's really where it started out for me.
And I could speak a little more to Rebecca's diagnosis since I am the older sister that she pointed out. I similarly don't really remember there not being asthma in our household. I was not actually diagnosed until I was a teenager. And so my asthma was diagnosed through exercise-induced asthma. I was playing, competitively playing tennis and really challenged with keeping up and having breathing issues and so on. Retrospectively, of course, you can think about, gosh, I bet when that happened or that happened, that was probably asthma, but everyone in our family, or not everyone in our family, but we really saw asthma through the lens of Rebecca's diagnosis, which was so severe that I think, they weren't comparative, if you will, which is true of asthma, right? Like it's so different for every person. And so I remember as a kid, a lot of pictures we have from Rebecca's childhood are with a mask on from, taking treatments and, inhaler usage was just a thing in our family. We always knew how to use them and so on. And so when I was diagnosed, I think people were kind of surprised because it did look very different. But interestingly, we've kind of flip-flopped a little bit with it as we've grown up. And we could talk about that some more, but yeah, our asthma is definitely very different now as adults than it was when we were younger.
Yeah, that's so interesting because again, we know that asthma can run in families, but it I love the point that you made is that it can still look very different for people even within the same family. So,
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I was hospitalized a few times with pneumonia as a kid, which I still in my adulthood have had issues with and have been hospitalized for, but there was still never really a connection of looking at if there were any other sorts of lung diseases or diagnoses out there. It was just more concentrating on infection and upper respiratory issues and sinuses and that sort of thing for me.
yeah. Okay. Now, Rebecca, you may have something here, but for my next question, but Sarah, since you were such a small child when you were diagnosed, I kind of just wanted to get, maybe what are some of your initial reactions and feelings upon being diagnosed with asthma? Um,
Yeah, I would say, again, I think I was glad to have the diagnosis because it explained finally kind of why I struggled. And it's interesting, I loved swimming as a kid. And now I can look back retrospectively because I have a lot of issues in adulthood with scents and cleaning supplies and that sort of thing. And I can look back again and say, gosh, I picked tennis over swimming and I loved swimming, but inside swimming was really hard for me compared to external. Or like even today, I was walking outside and they had mulched and used some fertilizer on a lawn, and oh, it was just the only thing I could smell. And I look back to my childhood and think, oh, I had such a reaction to like going into home stores and things when my parents would bring me. And so it's so interesting to look back on it and know that I likely had that beforehand, issues beforehand. So I think for me, finding out that I did have asthma was just this kind of like, yes, like it tied everything in a bow and made sense and helped me think that there was a plan ahead.
yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I was very little, so my life has always been living with asthma. But as an adult, I've had some more doctor's appointments where I've gotten into like immunologists and actually discovered that I have an immune deficiency. I don't have any mannose binding lectin, which ties back to, and now in adulthood, looking back to all the issues I had as a child likely were because I don't have it. So in doing some research on my own and looking up things, it does tie to asthma, it does tie to allergies, so all the things that I have. That's been an interesting thing, I guess, as an adult to kind of be able to digest it and realize that a lot of it probably does tie back to, lacking that.
I
Yeah.
will also say too, just growing up, Rebecca had mentioned that she had a lot of food allergies as a child, and that was a really interesting space to be in too, as a sister, as an older sister, because we didn't have in the 80s, aging ourselves, but we didn't have all the alternatives to milk or to other sorts of things that we have now. And she was allergic to all dairy, including eggs, chocolate, all nuts, we thought, definitely peanuts and so on. And so I would also say, like later on in life, I don't mean to speak for you, but like she did some food challenges and like we learned that she wasn't as allergic to things anymore, but still peanuts for sure. And so like it's kind of been like these steps of diagnoses of and I also found out I have a immunodeficiency that causes me to have a lot of lung infection. And so it's these like interesting like asthma, being diagnosed with asthma has helped us in this journey of understanding why we both have lung illnesses. I will also mention our father was a very heavy smoker and he smoked in the house, by a window or had the window down in the car. But of course, we know now that secondary and tertiary, smoke uh, is terrible too. And
Yeah.
so even though he stopped when we were both still in elementary school, I can't help but imagine that that did not help either of us at all in the home.
And we grew up in a pretty industrious city that I think in the past has been known to have some not so positive air quality. So, that could have also attributed to, some of the flare ups and severity of what we experienced.
Yeah. Great. So again, I know that the timing as far as like when you guys were each diagnosed is a little bit different, but how has that kind of impacted your view on life or view in general, I guess I would say, if that's something you've, even thought about.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. It's definitely helped with my trajectory of my profession. Doing health equity work, I started doing that on a asthma project when I first moved here to Chicago because the disparities were and still are so great, and profound. And I also would just say that, as a kid, it was tough. It's tough to sit out on things. It's tough to say that you can't participate in some of the things that other people are, or maybe it's not that you can't participate, but maybe at the level that other people are. I think that was challenging. I think, you know, I'm definitely affected by the weather, cold weather and things like that. So I think also just not being I've never skied. I've never done things that are cold weather related because there's just no interest because I think in my mind I would probably have trouble breathing or I might get sick or it might flare things up. I similarly, like I have very severe allergies to cats. And to the point that it's very challenging for me to be in a home for any amount of time that has one. And I think a lot of people don't look in it. It immediately starts to affect my breathing. And same with like cleaning supplies and things. And it's funny to see people's reactions where they're like, well, we're clean. We vacuum. Or, I mean, you only can use bleach to clean things. It's like people have these reactions like you're trying to say something else to them about their cleaning habits or their animal pet choice or what have you, but that's not the case. Or smoke, I cannot be around smoke. In college, smoking was still a thing in bars, and I'd have to say, I'm sorry, I can't go to that place because I know I'm going to have major issues. And so I think it's interesting to see how people look at asthma because I think it's so common that they don't really understand the severity that it can lead to. And so it's interesting in that way to kind of figure out who understands what, and those are kind of your closest allies and support.
Yeah, I think for me it was definitely I was sick a lot. And so, I would miss out on some opportunities just because of illness. Thankfully I stayed on top of it all and, had some really great doctors that really worked with me and my family to, try to give me back that quality of life. Because again, a lot of my childhood, especially as a toddler, even into, I would say, early elementary, was really impacted by, asthma and all the allergies that I had. Um, some of my core memories, some of my first memories I have actually are of being at the hospital and meeting other kids, that were there for, who knows why. But it's just interesting to realize that thinking back on it, that those are some of the first memories I have of my childhood. But again, thankfully, I knock on wood, it's been pretty well under control for quite some time. So yeah, that's, I guess.
And I
Yeah.
think we're lucky that we both have it in the sense of being each other's supports. Our parents understanding what to do and how, what is an asthma action plan and having those sorts of things in our house from the get-go, knowing where our hospitals are when we would travel with Rebecca, just in case we needed to go somewhere and she needed to get a nebulizing treatment and having a nebulizer, all of these things that are super important, but that many people aren't used to on the day to day. We had, that support. So I think we were lucky in that way too, to have each other and our parents and the doctors and so on.
And we're good at advocating for ourselves too. I mean, my doctors, know me pretty well. And, I will go run through the litany of what I've done before I even got there. And, at this point, we kind of know what the routine is. But I think that's also important is just being an advocate for yourself. People
Yeah.
that don't live with it don't know what it feels like. And, it's hard to explain to somebody, the feelings that you're having. So, just making sure that you're vocal and, get a doctor that really listens to you and, tailors kind of your regimen to what you need.
Yeah, so I mean, I want to touch on a couple of points that you guys brought up. I think Sarah, first you brought up as a lot of the comorbid conditions that occur with asthma,
Yeah.
and so again, we see that a lot of asthma is allergically driven,
Yep.
or again, puts you at risk of some of these other allergies like food allergies and other things that can have a big impact on lifestyle. But I also liked how you brought up of, I think a lot of people don't necessarily think of, when you have asthma, and especially if it's allergic or triggered from some of those things, like those little things in other people's that are a part of everybody's, or not everybody, but other people's like
Mhm.
daily lives, like using perfumes or plugins in their house or having a pet or again as you mentioned like cleaning with bleach, how that could really put somebody like either one of you know straight to the nebulizer machine or the emergency room or require a course of steroids. So I guess maybe if you guys would want to elaborate, I mean, I know you guys talked a little bit about like how you've had to change your lifestyle, but maybe also like how have you managed or navigated that of, again, maybe Sarah, your best friend had a cat, in college and you're like,
Amazing.
I love you, but,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I think that's something that I hear a lot of my patients or other people say, how do I navigate that when, I've had some people that are, their profession is home health, like going into
Right.
people's homes. So
Right.
I'll stop there and let you
Yeah.
answer that question.
Well, it's funny that last point you touched upon, the way that I actually found out that I was having these, that, I was being triggered by cleaning supplies, was through work. I was working on an asthma study and I was cleaning peak flow meters with a solution of bleach and water, because they were being reused by patients, not the mouthpieces, but the contraption itself. And I was working in health, and a doctor stopped by my cubicle, and I had all of the cleaned items out, all the peak flows out, drying. And he comes up and says, "Did you realize you're allergic to bleach? Like you are triggered by bleach?" And so, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You sit in your cubicle and cough and cough and cough every time you clean these." And I had never put it together that that's what it is, because you do just like, she coughs a lot at night and she's so used to it. And I'm like, "But you shouldn't always be coughing at night." So I think there's even still things that we are so used to that we have to be thoughtful about, that are, asthma related. I think for me, it's just really learning my triggers. And like Rebecca said, being willing to kind of share with other people, like, this is challenging for me and I can't do X, Y, or Z. Um, as an adult, I will ask ahead of time if I'm going to someone's home that I've never been to before. I'll say, "By chance, do you have cats?" And if they have cats and I'm only just going for like a work dinner or something small, I'll make sure to take preventive medication, take my inhaler ahead of time, take an extra allergy med, etc., bring my eye drops, that sort of thing. I also don't hang my coat up in place. Like I don't put my coat on things that are upholstered. And I also don't sit on things that are upholstered. So if I'm at a home, I'll just say, "Hey, do you have like a kitchen chair or something?" I might, a wooden chair. Or if I just see one, I'll grab that. I do my best to just stay as like away from things that are going to capture the cat hair. Like that's a very specific thing I do. Or if, unfortunately, if I'm going to visit someone and stay there and they have a cat, I usually have to stay somewhere else. But those are just like some of the little things I'll do.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the first ways I figured out some of my triggers, obviously I had significant food allergies, but when I was in elementary school, every time I was in art class, I would get super sick. Like I couldn't sit in the art class. And finally, they pinpointed, that it was probably the paints or some of the other things that we were actually using in the class were making me sick. And so that's kind of when I would say my first journey started, kind of in that allergy space of allergy shots and all of those things. But to Sarah's point, we have we're from a large extended family, and some of our family members have cats. And so anytime we know that they're going to host a major holiday, we kind of have to prepare ourselves, make sure we take all of our medications, or if we know they have a back patio or a front porch, like maybe we'll kind of spend most of our time out there when we are going to those sort of events. I think thankfully now we're at an age too where a lot of our friends have children or other family members that maybe have similar diagnosis, or asthma is a little bit more talked about and prevalent than maybe when we were younger. Similarly with allergies now, I know when I was younger, nobody knew what peanut allergies were just not as common as they are now. So people kind of understand, I think, a little bit more about asthma and allergies, and hopefully you're surrounded by people that, are respectful of that, and understand why you may have to excuse yourself to step outside, or ask them, in a case of one of our relatives, she would always wear like a pretty strong perfume, and Sarah would have to tell her, like, listen, can you, if we're going to be around each other, can you not wear it that day? So again, I think if you respectfully approach it and just kind of, make sure people understand the situation that you're in, 9 times out of 10, people are pretty accommodating and understandable.
And I think too, what has been hard, but I think to Rebecca's point, because it's more common now, is more understood, is like, it's not just that you might sneeze or cough from a cat. It's the spiral that happens afterwards, right? Like that's only the starting point. But what happens from that is that you get the flare up in your lungs, in your bronchial tubes, and then you start to cough, and then you start to get sick, and then you're out of school or you're out of work, or it might turn into this or that. And it's really hard. I mean, we travel with emergency prednisone. We travel with, and those aren't things you want to have to take. You don't want to take steroids. You don't want to take antibiotics all the time. But that's our life if we get sick. And so I think that's the other thing that folks don't realize is it's not just sneezing and coughing and eye irritation at the moment. It's what transpires afterwards that can really, it doesn't shut off the moment you walk away.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point is that, they're not seeing that part. They're not
Right.
seeing that, oh, now you're going to be, not able to, function at the level that you want for the next week or
Exactly,
longer
exactly,
sometimes. Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Um, so have you guys found any resources that have been helpful to help manage your asthma or even you guys talked a lot about like educating the people around you. So have you found any like sort of support groups online for anything that, can be helpful?
I joke because Sarah works in this space. Most of the education I've gotten is a lot from her. The doctors, of course, teach you how to use a spacer, but like, that's what she did for a living is teach kids and people how to use spacers. So, she'll always watch me when I'm doing it and tell me if I'm doing it right or doing it wrong. So I think having each other again, has been kind of our own support system. Again, having had it as being so young, I guess my doctors were probably a big support system. As I said, I can't reiterate enough that I was lucky enough to have some really great doctors that, educated me and put me through a battery of tests to really understand what was going on and how they could help me best manage, my specific situation and what would work best for me.
Great.
And I think I've not done any support groups or anything like that, but I think working in the space of asthma so early on in my career, you all, folks like yourself and others that I could just, run things by or say, does this seem strange to you? Or I had a lot of access to resources, and so I think to Rebecca's point, I kind of would share those, share those around. But I do think what's been so neat, I watched Rebecca with her food allergy is, some of her best friend's kids are now living with peanut allergies, and we have a little younger cousin with a peanut allergy, and Rebecca's really able to be their resource and say, okay, now, so-and-so is at an age where they need to remember to be bringing their EpiPen with them, or so-and-so is at an age where they need to remember that if they don't take their inhaler ahead of time, this may be what happens. And so I think we both have been able to be, while we may not have had as much of a resource kind of packed life younger, we have become resources, which I think is been really, we've been lucky to be able to do that and to help other folks that are having those challenges.
And I'm grateful now that, there are organizations and support groups that are available because honestly, growing up, that was never something offered to me that I recall. And so, I think obviously with the progression of time and unfortunately, probably the more people that are now having these diagnoses, that it's important that they have those resources, especially I think kids, because it is challenging when you're the quote unquote, sick kid or the kid that can't run the mile because they have to stop and, use their inhaler or walk so that they don't, give themselves an asthma attack. Like that kind of thing was not made available, that I recall growing up. It was just, you know, oh, she has to sit out or, they can't participate in this. So I do think, that it's important that there are opportunities and organizations and groups now available for people that, do unfortunately, suffer from, asthma and severe allergies.
And I would say Chicago Asthma Consortium, I became a member right when I moved to Chicago, when I learned about CAC. And so I also think I get, I still sit in on lectures and lunch and learns and go to meetings where and when I can because it's changing all the time. Like Rebecca said, 40 years ago when we were diagnosed is very different than today. Immunology has changed. Research has changed. We're learning things that we didn't know before. And so I think, medications are changing. The way that you take medication is changing. And so I think all of that, I like to stay up to date on it because I never know. My asthma has probably, and allergies have probably gotten worse as I've been getting older. And so it's something I keep an eye on because I do want to kind of know what's there in case things were to um, continue to be, if I were to ever become severe, like knowing kind of what my options are.
So, kind of just building off what you just said, Sarah, as far as as you get older, it seems like maybe your allergies and asthma have been more difficult. So, how do you, and this is for both of you, but how do you guys envision managing your asthma in the future as you're getting older?
I mean, to me, it's so important to know your triggers. That is something I pay a lot more attention to. Um, I do what I can to avoid my triggers. I just wasn't, over the winter was invited to go to a sports event that was outside. And I said, wait, it's outside? I said, I'm not going to that. I have the autonomy now to kind of say no to things and to put myself in spaces that won't trigger me. My mom, we went home for the holidays once and she thought it was a lovely idea to have a pine scented plug-in. She said, but it's natural. It's a tree scent. And I said, no, Mom, you've got to open the windows, get that thing out of here. Like, so it's being able to just kind of really say and be where you need to and want to. And so I think that is what I pay the most attention to is what are things that are bothering me? How can I get out of that space? We always joke there's a very popular soap company that you can just walk by the doors if they're open and it's just such a strong smell. And I'm like, I could never go in that store. And I don't have to. It used to be that people, when I was in college, it was a cool place to go, but I don't have, like, it's not important to me in the scheme of things. And I know it's a trigger and I really just focus on that, like staying healthy, not putting myself in harm's way or being in a space where I know that I'll be triggered.
Yeah, and for me, now, like I've said before, I thankfully it's pretty well managed. But I also just know that for the rest of my life, I will be taking, Zyrtec every day, Flonase every day,
Every day.
Astapro every day, and Symbicort every day, and so that's just become part of my daily routine of what I have to do. I also, what really helped me get to this space though was I did allergy shots for about 13 years of my life. One in each arm, they'd get as big as softballs, but it, obviously helped me. I also had several sinus surgeries. So I think I've had 4 to 5 sinus surgeries. And, once I had those, that also helped kind of me with my asthma symptoms, because I think to Sarah's point, certain things in the environment were really impacting me and causing me to get sinus infections and upper respiratory infections. And, again, one of the doctors determined that, as he said, the plumbing in my nose was bad. And so, a lot of infection would just stay in there. And once I was able to have surgery to get that removed, that really helped me also get the asthma and the allergies all under control. But again, I think it's just to Sarah's point, setting boundaries of knowing what we can and cannot do. And then also making sure that we're staying on top of taking our medicines regularly,
Yes.
taking them appropriately. And if they're not working anymore, talking to our doctors and seeing, maybe if there's something newer and better for us to be trying.
Okay,
And I
great.
would say, interestingly, too, not every medication or treatment works the same way for everyone. I also was on allergy shots for over a decade. They weren't that great for me. They didn't do the trick, unfortunately. I didn't see much improvement. And I also had sinus surgery, which to me was the golden ticket. It really, really helped me um, almost right away with calming down my sinus infections and my upper respiratory infections, which of course immediately lead to me having less asthma exacerbations and issues. And so, it's all kind of connected in that space for us. And so I think some things work for people, some don't. So yeah, being an advocate and putting yourself into spaces that are most healthy for you are, I think, most important. And what I continue to hope to do as I get older.
Okay, great. So again, since you are both seasoned people living with asthma, I just wanted to kind of start end the podcast, and especially again, this is May, asthma month. Is what advice would you give to others who are newly diagnosed with asthma?
Yeah, I think it's just, don't be afraid to ask questions. Again, like I said, really be an advocate for yourself. And unfortunately, it might be some trial and error, just
Right.
finding out, what medication works for you, what medication doesn't. Again, it could be that you used to be a long distance runner, but now maybe you can only do short sprints. Again, it's kind of some of those things that unfortunately you just have to um, figure out as you go along. Obviously, there's things that you can do to, um, lessen the chance of symptoms, but there's also going to be situations or places like Sarah said, if you didn't know that perfumes were a trigger and maybe they weren't a year ago and now they are, unfortunately, it's going to be walking into a space or talking to somebody that maybe is wearing a hand lotion or doing something that's stronger scented. But again, I think that as long as you take care of yourself and you talk to your doctors, you can still lead a very long and great life. It
Totally.
doesn't have to be something that sets you back. And you shouldn't let it be something that sets you back, because if you feel that awful, or you feel like there's things that you can't do that are lessening the quality of your life, then that's when you need to say, hey, I can't live like this, and talk to your physician, or, go to a support group and talk to some other people that are living with the same situation, and, realizing that you're not the only one, but that there are things that you can do to make sure that, you're still living a fun, healthy, productive life.
Ditto all that. And just reiterating, know your triggers, pay attention to them, write things down, even journal a little bit. Here are the things that I've noticed start to have me coughing or wheezing or, that sort of thing. Just pay attention to yourself and your body in different environments. I would also say seek counsel and seek resources from places like Chicago Asthma Consortium. If CAC doesn't have the answer, they probably know someone that does. And so I think the more that you can do that, the better. I also would say, if you're an adult, I think, or even a child too, accommodations are there for a reason, and we are thankfully in a space now where it's not uncommon to go to your HR or go to a teacher or a nurse or the school and say, these are the things that trigger me, or these are the things that I have challenges with. I've had to do that in my workspace where cleaning solutions were being used that were really, really triggering me. I also had someone that was over the cubicle from me who really liked to use air freshener in their cubicle, and I had to either be asked to move or asked that not no longer be something that folks can use. And no one knew it was me, but it was just something that I could go and ask about. And again, there are more options now that may not have been true in the 1980s. It might have just been bleach and water solvent, but now we have so many more cleaning supplies and things like that that aren't going to be as triggering. So, just identify what you need and know your rights, and think of it as any other potential illness that you need help with. And so I think, and surrounding yourself with people that get it. That aren't serving Rebecca, a peanut butter pie for her birthday, or that are saying, I have a cat, so why don't we meet out for coffee instead of you coming over? That sort of thing, I think is really, really helpful.
Okay, great. So I think kind of from what you both said, I think a few things, big takeaways that I got actually from this whole conversation is advocate for yourself. As you said, Rebecca, asking questions. And then also, as you said, Sarah, like if you can't be exposed to this strong cleaning supply used at work or even in the schools, advocate for you or, your child, so you can avoid those exposures. I also heard, I think from this conversation is preparation.
Mhm.
So I think you guys talked a lot about like being prepared, even as a child, your parents were prepared of knowing what hospitals were around, but you guys knowing like where your medicines are, having them with you, making sure that they're not running out.
Mhm.
And also partnership in general. And that could be, again, with your friends, your clinician, your asthma clinician. Those are, some, I think, key takeaways that I took
Definitely.
from our conversation, which was wonderful. So.
Yeah, I don't travel anywhere without my fast acting inhaler. So
Ditto.
it's not that big. You can just throw it in a pocket or a purse or backpack. So it's also
Yeah.
important.
Yeah,
Yeah, what
exactly.
one of my favorite community health workers always says, like, you're not going to leave your cell phone before you go out.
Right.
Treat
Exactly.
treat your inhaler, your rescue or fast acting inhaler as you treat your cell phone and carry
Exactly.
it.
Absolutely. And it's always, I always would say to people, it's a seatbelt, like you may never, ever, 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 God willing, get into an automobile accident. But if you do, it's great to know you have your seatbelt on. And that's how I used to say it to young people all the time. When I was teaching folks how to use inhalers, I said, it's your seatbelt. Like, hopefully you never have to use it. But if you do need it and it's not there, that's when the problems really happen.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, again, I want to thank both of you so much for taking the time to be on our Inhale Life Asthma Conversations from the Chicago Asthma Consortium. And we'll definitely have to have you both back in the future.
Thanks
Thank you
to
so much for
you.
having us.
Appreciate it.